Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Ask the Voice of Authority, brought to you by Carter Jonas and GLE and Haptic Architects and London Square Partners. My name's Toby Fox, and I keep a network of councils and developers and investors and their influencers and advisors connected. And one of the ways I've been doing that is by interviewing public sector leaders and officers to give our network a deeper understanding of the vision for a place and how it will grow and evolve by hearing from the people shaping that vision and what makes them tick. And you can find an archive of hundreds of written and recorded interviews at thevoiceofauthority.co.uk. Now, the format of these live interviews is simple. We ask the Voice of Authority 7 questions. The first 3 cover their wish list and the challenges they must overcome to deliver that list and the partners that they're seeking to help them. And then we'll ask our Voice of Authority what constitutes good development and who or what has shaped their views on growth and the watershed moments in their life and career that have led them to our screens today. And then finally, we'll ask what they get up to outside of work. What are the interests and passions that drive and motivate them and perhaps shape those views and ambitions? And we're delighted that today, those questions are going to be put to Alice Lester, MBE, who is Operational Director for Regeneration, Growth and Employment at the London Borough of Brent, twice listed as one of the most influential women in planning, awarded an MBE for services to planning, and leader of the RTPI's Planning Team of the Year in 2019. Alice's career takes in stints in planning with Westminster and Camden and Islington and Brent, as well as over a decade heading up the LGA's Planning Advisory Service, before her current role taking on Brent's Regeneration, Growth and Employment remit. We're going to explore Alice's thoughts on the true value of planning to local authorities and how public sector planners can obtain recognition and resources and the ongoing government review of planning. And we're going to ask about what tools councils have to maintain delivery as we move out of the pandemic, but into recession, including directly. So Brent aims to build 1,000 homes a year itself, and supporting and guiding regeneration in places like South Kilburn and Alperton and Neasden and Church End and Staples Corner and Wembley Park, and through partnerships in Old Oak and Park Royal and Northwick Park and beyond. And we're going to come to all of that over the next hour. But let's kick off in our tried and tested way by asking Alice, what are the 3 things at the top of your wish list for Brent?
Hi there, Toby. Good morning to everybody, and thanks very much for inviting me onto this show. So the 3 things at the top of my wish list for Brent, well, I think the top of my wish list would really that the recession would go away, but I don't think that's within mine or Brent's gift to deliver. So we've just got to manage it, and I'm sure we'll cover a bit of that. But in terms of the wider picture and what I want to achieve in Brent, a few things. So Brent is a borough that very much welcomes development, the right development, I should say. It's not development anywhere at any cost, but the right development. And we do have ambitions to grow the authority. So our local plan, which was adopted earlier this year in February, sets out our spatial vision for good growth across the borough. And so that growth is focused in the most sustainable locations in the growth areas. So some of those exist already, and they're cooking, as we say. So you mentioned Wembley Park and Alperton already. The regeneration there is well underway, and also South Kilburn, which I'll touch on a bit more later. But I want to see the next growth area start to thrive and for developments come forward. So I'm particularly thinking of and talking about Neasden Station's growth area, which is a new designation in this plan, and we think Neasden is a unloved, untouched area that would really benefit from regeneration. It is one of the most deprived parts of the borough, and I firmly believe, as does the council, that regeneration can do a lot of good in bringing new opportunities to people and reducing inequalities. It's not as simple as that, but it's part of a picture that helps. So Neasden is an area that we think has got lots and lots of potential. It's got about 6 or 7 reasonably sized sites that we want to see coming forward around some of the industrial and waste land at the moment. But the key driver is our ambitions to achieve the West London Orbital, a new train line and a new station in that area, because that will, something like a new station really transforms an area and brings in a lot of attraction and investment. So there's quite a lot around that. We've also got Church End coming forward. The master plan for that is shortly to be adopted by the council. It's just finished its statutory consultation. And again, that's a growth area which has existed for a while, but it hasn't attracted interest of investors in the development community. So we're hoping that setting out a master plan where we've worked really closely with the community and the landowners, you know, will actually make that fly and begin. In fact, that has just started, because the council here does own one key site, which has just started on site to redevelop for a new market square and around 90 odd new council homes. So I'm hoping, as is the way with lots of regeneration schemes, it's a public sector start that then triggers and attracts later development. So hopefully Church End will be one of those. And then finally, Staples Corner. I mean, that's a long game, Staples Corner. There's masses of potential, and it's opposite the new Brent Cross town and the new Cricklewood station. So we want to make sure that on our side of the A5 that we maximise, you know, the attraction and the investment that can go there. But it is strategic industrial land at the moment, so it's and it's in a myriad of different ownerships. So that's the long game. I mean, that's the hard one, and it's the long game. But hopefully over the plan period, we're able to make that come forward. So that's, you know, let's get development to continue and flourish in the borough. That's one of the things. Now, the second wish list, and this is quite personal to me, I think, and it reflects my long career in local government. I've only ever wanted to work in the public sector. And one of the things that I see the role of regeneration and planning is very much delivering on corporate council objectives. So across the council plan, the borough plan, which is currently undergoing a refresh, but there are a couple of sort of priorities, one of which is an economy built for everyone, a future fit for all, and every opportunity to succeed as well as another one. And I think the role that planning and regeneration can play in delivering on those objectives is massive. So, you know, it's building homes, you know, whether it's affordable homes or all tenure homes, you know, that's a good thing. And I think that helps. It brings investment. It brings in council tax, business rates, community infrastructure levy. It brings in employment opportunities, better public realm, I would say, you know, new open space, good quality homes. It helps with a lot of objectives of the council around improving the lives of residents. So, you know, planning applications, big ones bring in an employment and training plan. So my economic development and employment team work with employers on that and matching, you know, the jobs and apprentices to residents. We do quite a lot of work with the care leavers and the adult team. So we're facilitating better opportunities for them. We're working with colleagues in schools about a new special educational needs centre for post-16 skills. So that links in that there'll be a planning application for that. That links in, you know, to the economic development team, the employment skills. So I love sort of joining all of that up and making sure that we can facilitate, you know, the council's wider objectives. So I have an officer who's dedicated to the council's house building programme, so that we have a good relationship with housing and property who lead on that. Because it was really important to me when I started at Brent, actually. I did not want the planning team to be seen as a blocker or a barrier or difficult. I wanted planners to be absolutely crucial to delivering on the council's aims and objectives. So, and I think I've managed that. I think I hammer home the message about planning applications that this is a really important corporate scheme and you need to play your role in that. So widen your planning hat and think a bit more holistically and a bit more corporately. So when I was in head of planning before I got the director role, I used to sort of say to colleagues, my role might be to be the chief planner, but I'm also employed to deliver on the council's objectives, and I can make that work together. So that's one of my secondaries on the wish list, is to carry on sort of doing that. And finally, and I just mentioned it earlier, it's to continue with the South Kilburn estate regeneration programme. So this is our council estate. It's the one that's undergoing extensive regeneration. We are rehousing everybody that's on the estate who wants to stay there. Most people do, but if they want to move elsewhere in the borough or go onto the system which enables them to move outside of the borough, then they can. But most people want to stay in the area, that they feel they're rooted in the community. So there are around 1,200 tenants that need to be rehoused, but we're doubling the capacity of the homes on the site, so there'll be over 2,400 by the time it's finished, but that'll be mixed tenure, so it'll be across the estate around 50% affordable homes with existing residents relocated, and 50% mostly private sale, but there might be some intermediate and other forms of tenure that come in. So we're about halfway through. so it's been a constant building site, and that will continue for a while. So it's quite hard for some of the people who live there, and that presents its challenges about how many sites do you have being developed at once, and all of that logistical side of things. But the aim is to create a brand new neighbourhood which provides really decent homes, and they are really decent homes that are being built. But new public realm, we're reinstating the street network. We've got a medical centre included. We've got a new school, replacing 2 existing sort of decaying schools. Lots of trees and urban green areas. It's an area the council has chosen to be a low carbon neighbourhood. So again, that links back to achieving corporate objectives, and it'll just be a better place for people to live. And sort of linking back to some of what I've said earlier, and a lifetime of public service, I suppose, this is all about making life better for people. And some of the homes that people are in at the moment, on the estate, some are fine actually, but some of the homes are they're not great places to live, and at other places in the borough as well. So having a decent home to live in is so fundamental to people's and children's life chances, and their ability to thrive and prosper and contribute is so important, that getting decent housing built, particularly for those most in need, is quite at the core of why I do this job.
Fantastic, Alice. Thanks very much for setting us up there. Now, you've given us a really wide package to dig into. I'm going to jump straight into the second part of the interview and ask you about the challenges around that wish list. Let's start with South Kilburn. I've got a developer viewer who has asked about how the public sector can procure new housing projects in the inflationary market that we're experiencing. I wonder if I could break that down into 2 parts. How does cost inflation affect your ability to take on the new schemes, the church ends in your plan? And how does it affect your ability to complete something like South Kilburn? How does it change the shape of what you're creating there?
Yeah, that's such a pertinent question, and the council is a developer as well, so we're asking these questions of ourselves. I don't think I've got the answer to this. I think we're in the early days of working this through. It is being played out though, so we've got some schemes that we're already in contract with. So does it sound a bit crash to say it's the developer's problem? Because kind of it is their problem, but if it is their problem, it also becomes my problem if things start to not being able to be delivered. So we're just having discussions about how we might be able to tweak things or phase things differently, but that does present us with some political challenges if it means it looks like we're going back on manifesto commitments or promises that we've made to the community. But needs must, we still want to get these things delivered, so we have to be slightly flexible, I think, and we're exploring the red lines. I suppose it's all about the red lines, isn't it? About where we can flex and where we can't. And I expect developers to also sort of play their part in that, and seeing what they can do. Because
is there a different way of looking at procurement itself? Are there different approaches that you can use to the whole process, given that the rug has moved so substantially under everyone's feet?
We have. Well, so there are 2 things on that. Just the council as a procurer, so particularly for the council's house building schemes, which doesn't actually sit within my remit, but I'm quite involved in it. Certainly we're noting a preference for 2-stage contracts, 2-stage tenders rather than 1 stage, which we would prefer. My finance director, is very concerned about it because it just leaves a lot of uncertainty up in the air. So we're having to look at how we're building in contingency amounts to our asks. We're certainly looking at where we might be able to use strategic infrastructure levy, community infrastructure levy a bit more, to help fund the infrastructure. So if that's a community centre, which is part of a mixed use housing scheme, then let's look if we can justify using SIL for that. So we're doing things like that. And that's around the procurement. In South Kilburn, which is where you started with the question, but the model that we've used at the moment is to parcel up the estate into small groups. So it might be a 1 block, it might be a couple of adjoining blocks. We have been taking schemes through to planning permission. So we'll procure a design team, we'll take it through to planning permission, and then we go out to the market and we have a developer agreement. We retain the freehold. The idea is that they give us a land receipt and they build it with a registered provider partner, which might be the council. In one instance, it's likely to be the council, but it might be a housing association. That's the model which has been successful to date to get us about halfway through. But for a number of reasons, we are starting to look at a different model, which is to have a single delivery partner for the remainder of the programme, because we think partly responding to the market, which is we think a bigger offer will attract bigger. We weren't reaching some SMEs anyway because the size was too big for SMEs. So, but we just think having a bigger offer will attract more people to the market. It gives much more opportunity for cross subsidy, because some of the sites with a particularly high quota of affordable housing, or for example, the new school building, are less viable than perhaps some of the sites which are closer to Queen's Park Station. So if it's all in one package, it gives a greater opportunity to flex. We're thinking there'll be economies of scale on site. You know, you can move your hoardings along to the next site. All sorts of it feels as though there are all sorts of advantages. So we're currently working up that project. It's not secret. We've been talking openly because we've been asking the market about the approach, and the response has been quite favourable. So that's a big piece of work in terms of priority for next year, actually, to do that. So we hope that within that model for South Kilburn, it will give us and potential developer partners an easier way of approaching the inflationary costs. What we don't want to do, though, is really dumb down. I mean, I suppose this is where we get to our red lines. You know, we still want to have good quality development. I don't know what the magic answer is, you know, but we are, you know, with other partners on other schemes, sort of looking at some degree of value engineering. But that's a normal part of any process, actually, the value engineering, and see where you might be able to tweak things and make savings. So, but I think it's really, yeah, I mean, it's really hard. So with our own council building schemes, you know, we are looking at where we can tweak those, or perhaps change the tenure slightly for a different split, which is not what we want to do, but we want to get these things built as well. And we've got 24,000 people on our waiting list. We can't just sit back and think, oh, let's see what happens in 3 years' time, and maybe we'll revisit. You know, we do need to get building now, get people in.
Quite, Alice. Second challenge that I wanted to put to you was around your capacity to deliver on everything that you've set out. So I guess, and there's two parts to this. Firstly, how are you ensuring that you've got the capacity to deliver in Brent? But secondly, with your wider sort of spokesperson for planning hat on, I've got a question that came in from Kate Ryan, who's Chief Exec at New Forest District Council. And she asked specifically about smaller authorities with growth and regen opportunities who are struggling to recruit the leadership and delivery experience needed to given the competitive market. So how can we ensure that all councils can play their role in creating better places?
So in terms of Brent, I think we do have challenges. We particularly have challenges recruiting at a senior level. So one of our responses to that has been to grow our own a lot. So quite a few of our career grade planners have progressed into more senior positions, and we work quite hard on mentoring and buddying the more junior planners so that they get exposed to, you know, bigger applications. They get involved in some of the discussions, they sit in on the meetings, they might sort of have some contact with the politicians or ward members and the briefings, you know, certainly the developers, and they help solve problems and everything. So that's a way of training them up so that they are able, when the opportunity arises, to apply and get a promotion, but it's also just sort of part of their general development and maintaining their interest in planning and their interest in working at Brent. I introduced when I started that we will pay the RTPI professional membership fees because it's actually not that, well, an individual who doesn't get their employer to pay it might think it's quite expensive, but I do think that it's important to be part of your profession and the professional body. So I introduced that, and in the scheme of my budget, it's not a big cost, and I think it's an important signal both to the planners that I value their professionalism, but also to applicants that I take having professional planners, qualified planners seriously, and I'm prepared to support that. And also introduced time off for people who are studying. So instead of them having to take leave or do it in their own time, I introduced a day off, because I felt that, not a day off, a day for them to go and study, because I felt that the size of the company, the team was big enough to carry that. So there are just a few little things which I think as a leader gives the message to my staff: I value you here, I want you to do well. Now, inevitably, some staff leave, and that's absolutely fine. And instead of seeing it as a I don't get cross. I think, isn't that fantastic that we've given you the opportunity to fly and take your skills somewhere else? It breaks my heart a little bit if they don't go to another local authority, but hey, you know, that happens, and I need good private sector planning consultancies as well to be able to do my job. Generally, there just aren't enough qualified planners though, and I know that the RTPI and also DLARC are looking at that, about how they can increase capacity, because it's not just the public sector that has trouble recruiting the right number of planners. But we recently had, I don't know whether it was a sort of post-pandemic thing, we had a lot of churn, and we lost a lot of planners at all levels. So over sort of a 3-month period, we had quite a big recruitment program, and we were successful, and we have recruited, I think we've had over about a 3-month period, we had 7 or so new starters, mostly at the beginning, the start of their careers. Some had a year or two's experience, some of them were graduates. But I love that. I love getting a graduate in and being able to infuse and excite them with prior approvals and certificates of lawfulness. But what I'm particularly proud of is that of the 7 who started, 6 were from BAME backgrounds, and the one who wasn't was French. So I feel that really reflected the diversity of the borough, and it's really important to the council that the workforce does. So across the planning service, or my wider service, it's 56% of staff are BAME. That's compared to 65%, I think, across the council. But the reason I think we were able to attract this cohort of planners is because Brent's a really exciting place to work, planning and regeneration wise, but also it is a council that takes this really seriously. And so the diversity of the workforce and the borough is really, really important to the borough and to the people who work there. So I hope the message went out, which is, come and work for Brent. There's a place for you. It's really interesting work. You will be valued and supported, and your career will develop. And whilst you're making these planning decisions and getting involved, you'll be doing good things for the community. So, Kate, New Forest. So I've only ever worked in London local authorities, and yes, there's churn between us. I don't like to use the phrase we steal each other's, but inevitably there's quite a lot of choice for any planner working in London, with sort of 32 boroughs to choose from. Yeah. So I do get that it's much, much harder when there isn't that sort of pool. I think you just have to really promote the benefits. So, or look at different ways of recruiting. I mean, I've not done this, but, can you go into schools or use the RTPI ambassador program to help really big up the exciting prospects? Is there a career grade development scheme that you could do? I mean, I've looked at things before. This has never happened, but it's not to say it won't. I looked once at doing secondments with the private sector, actually. So I would get planners there for a year. They would get their planners here for a year. In the end, we just couldn't make the timings work, mainly because, well, it just didn't work out. But can you do that? Can you do that with other local authorities? Might not actually increase the numbers, but it is all part of the attraction of you as an employer if you're giving these opportunities.
My colleague, I think at Runnymede Council recently suggested using apprenticeships schemes as well.
Yeah, we actually haven't got a planning apprenticeship yet, although we have got a building control apprenticeship, and that's a young woman. It's just really fantastic to get a young woman into the building control profession, because females in that sector are few and far between. So we're really pleased about that. So yeah, we do look at apprenticeships in the planning field, but at the moment we've been able to recruit at career grade level. But I accept that it's a bit more about that, because it's developing the profession. So it's something that we probably do need to do.
Fantastic, Alice. Thanks very much indeed. Now, I want to move on to partnerships and partners, and the appetite for growth of social housing in Brent is absolutely clear. But how much of that are you planning to do alone as Brent Council, and how much are you looking for partners to do it? And if you're looking for partners, what kind of company do you want to work with?
So it's a mixture of both. Obviously, the council isn't a great landowner in Brent. We do have our own council house building programme, a lot of which is sort of infill, which is not always straightforward, because some people who live there get concerned about losing their garages or their drying area, or bit of spare land, square of land that is not really used. But we do think the goal is important enough to sort of work through those those concerns and try and work with the community, sometimes successfully, sometimes less so, and to provide those new homes. as I said, we've got 24,000 people on our housing waiting list, and there'll be a lot of people in housing need that aren't even on the waiting list. You know, we're in overcrowded and unsuitable accommodation. So it's really important for us. So we're doing that ourselves. So we procure a developer partner and progress that way. But most of it, I mean, I mentioned the growth areas earlier on, aside from South Kilburn and the Northwick Park and one public estate scheme, it's pretty much private sector land. So we have to work with partners. Our developer partners, well, I think the first thing with any partnership and any council trying to do things, it's about trust and respect. So these things, regeneration schemes don't happen quickly. I mean, Wembley Park was probably conceived, I don't know, 25 years ago, probably was when it all started. And it's flying now and it's fantastic and it's about halfway through, but these things do take a long time. So you need a partner who recognises that and is in it for the long haul. So in Wembley Park, we've had Quintain, you know, who are the major landowner. So they are the, you know, deliverers, they're the developer, but I don't think they'd be able to do it without a council that they didn't have a good working relationship with, who wanted the same objectives. So you're in it for the long term. There's trust and respect. It's not about building individual buildings. It is about placemaking, because it is about, you know, providing the facilities to support, you know, new homes and new communities. It is about looking at the public realm and, well, the planning. It's about planning, isn't it? It's about, you know, making a development which, you know, doesn't turn its back on existing communities or each other within the new, you know, development. So it's street patterns. It's, I was about to say urban scale then, but you know, we do build high. We do let high buildings, and that's become part of the sort of the scale and the fabric of Brent. And I make no apologies for that. You know, I think the council's very, you know, recognises that the volume that high buildings can bring, but it is about making sure that that works and it's providing a good quality environment. So there's a lot around sort of trust and respect, you know, long-term commitment. I think they've got to also be prepared to use the expertise. They've got to be able to see planners as partners and facilitators and not annoying people who get in the way and stop me making lots of money. And I think the good partnerships that we have, so St George's, Berkeley Homes on the Land Union scheme, that has been a long nurtured, valued, respectful relationship to deliver that, which is ongoing. You know, likewise with Quintain. And I hope we'll be able to do that in our other sites in Neasden coming forward and Church End. So, and also the relationship needs to be at all levels. So there needs to be the operational, you know, planner to planner or planning consultant to planner, you know, urban designer, architect relationship. But there needs to be a relationship at my level, which is a bit more, you know, should we just check in? Everything going all right? Anything you need me to push, sort, whatever? I've had to pick up the phone and say to people off the record to say, it's not good enough. You've got to do something, you know, you've got to relook at this. You've got to, you know, it's just not good enough. So I've got to be able to have that relationship with partners. And there's got to be, I would say, sometimes with the chief exec as well, but the political leadership as well. So with the lead member and the leader, we do quite a lot of that sort of briefings with, you know, with or without the architect in the room, with the leader and the lead member, who are very supportive of growth, of the right growth of development. So, and sort of with that political aspect, I think a good partner needs to listen to ward councillors and involve ward councillors, because there's nobody better at knowing the community or how to access parts of the community than the ward councillors. So this understanding that the council is a facilitator and can help you deliver what you want, if it helps us both to deliver our vision, I think is really important. And any developers listening, if you're not doing that with Brent already, then that, you know, that's something that you really need to look at. But they're not the only partners. GLA is a big partner, partly funding wise, but also on strategic sites and referable applications. So we need to be able to work well with the GLA. Registered providers, we have some who do more work in Brent than others, but again, you know, having their main relationship with this housing, but they also need to have a relationship with planners. We mentioned other boroughs, so we're part of the West London Alliance, which is 7 West London authorities. So, you know, we work together on the basis that a collective voice at volume representing all of us is easier than a lone voice.
Who do you want to hear that voice? At what point is a collective voice useful to you?
Government. is one thing, central government, but also London government, so the GLA, London councils, etc. It's a way of, and I suppose investors as well who are interested in working in West London, because West London, access to Heathrow, a lot of fantastic parks, heritage and the river and canals. There's developments.
Yeah, and of course they're not necessarily looking at the borders between places.
Yeah,
they're looking at places as a whole.
Yeah.
How much are you influenced in your plans and your approach to delivering those plans by what neighbouring boroughs are doing?
We work more closely with some on different things. So, for example, we're working with Barnet because of their development on the other side of the A5. So their links to Staples Corner and the overall sort of growth potential there, and the huge North Circular motorway sort of gyratory there, impacts on us all. So we'll work with Barnet and the West London boroughs, which will have the West London orbital if it goes ahead going through. So again, sort of Barnet, Brent and Hounslow in particular are the one, and Ealing actually, the ones that sort of are involved in that. So we'll work more closely with those on those particular projects. I mean, the West London Alliance sort of represents, so we've got innovation districts. We haven't got one in Brent, but we've got them in other parts of the borough. But I welcome those and happy to support and work with those because it enhances the value of West London, down the road. Same with creative enterprise zones. So I think that's important. There is a sort of glue, a West London interest that knits us all together. It's perhaps interesting with other adjoining authorities which aren't part of that alliance. So there's Westminster, Kensington, Chelsea, Camden. Is there another one? No. Well, Harrow's part of the West London Alliance. Anyway, so and I would say we have more localized relationships with them. So with Camden, we're working closely with them on the Kilburn High Road, because that's where the borough boundary splits. Westminster, not so much, but we have the shared boundary on the Harrow Road and the town centre. So so it varies, really. It varies.
And you mentioned government and needing a voice to government. What's your take on the direction of travel for planning reform? And does the removal of housing targets, for example, does that affect how you approach planning and development?
Yeah, that's interesting. And again, I think it's partly the early stages. So, I mean, going back to the planning white paper, I thought there were quite sensible things in there, to be honest. Particularly around the digitalisation of the planning system. And I know there are some fantastic sort of pilot and prototype work that's going on, and we're not involved in that actually, but that's really good. At the time, my approach was, I think maybe we were low on capacity at the time, but my thoughts were, great, everyone else can go and try it, and when we know what works, thanks, I'll have it. Because that was my approach then, and so really looking forward to seeing what comes out of that digitising the planning system. So that was all good. I'm uncomfortable with the changes, the detail of which we do not know, about the community infrastructure levy and section 106s. There are two reasons for that. One is, I know it's really complicated, but I think the basic idea is sound. Brent is the second highest collecting authority in the country for the 21 to 22 reporting year, second only to Barnet. So I think on SIL, we collected 17 million. Yeah, I know, mouth drop, and you are quite right to say on what she's spending it on. But we have spent some of our SIL on infrastructure, and we have allocated. It might not be out the door yet, but we have allocated, I think, around 60 to 70 million of our SIL pot on infrastructure. So one example of that, and this is a scheme I'm really proud of, which actually is the answer to one of the future questions. It's called Moorlands, and it's a replacement adult education centre. Yeah. So, which was in a falling down building. So the skills offer that we had was not good enough because the building it was in did not facilitate good teaching and learning. This is in my area as well, employment and skills. So working with our property colleagues and finance, we took through to planning permission a new scheme, which is for a brilliant new adult education centre. It includes a community cafe, which helps with the learning, and also affordable workspace, which again will help with the learning. We hope will be a springboard for students to go and work in, and also 65 new council homes. And I think it's a really good scheme. I really like it. There are financial viability challenges to delivering it, has to be said. So we're looking at that and other sources of funding, but we are using a considerable amount of strategic infrastructure levy to finance the adult education aspect of that, because we've got a growing population, we've got a massive demand on those courses. So you know, it relates to infrastructure to support growth and development. So that's one example where we're putting still.
And it's good news for the local community, isn't it? It's a benefit from growth that's really tangible and clear for everyone to see. We're all getting part of this. Let's move on, Alice. I want to ask you about exactly that, about what you see as examples of good development. You've mentioned moorlands, and if you want to dig into that any further, then by all means do. But what other places do you point at and say, this is what I think of as good, and would you point your graduate planners, your learning planners, and would you point potential developers at and say, come to me with some of this, please?
Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously I'm proud of Wembley Park. I think that's a good one, and that's quite a different one because it's such a big build to rent scheme. They're all built to rent, which does mean that they've been able to deliver at pace, actually. Because they're not sort of flooding the market in the same way that that private for sale developments can be. So I do think Wembley Park has transformed an area from basically muddy coach park industrial land with a stadium in the middle into a new thriving community for visitors, workers and residents alike, you know, with decent facilities. And that also extends up the high street. So it's not just the Quintain Wembley Park bit, up Wembley High Road, up towards the station. You know, there's some really, you know, good developments, and hopefully a council scheme coming on board as well. Some good developments there. So I'm, you know, I like that one. I think that's good development. But I think your question probably is outside of Brent, you know, what else? Or both. So I think probably everybody says King's Cross. But I do think it's fantastic, and it has particular resonance for me because I worked at Camden for 10 years, or maybe throughout the 90s. So there were various, you know, regeneration plans which came to nothing because of various recessions, but it was being worked on even then. But as a planning officer, where that was in my patch, I remember going to do site visits, and you didn't want to go on your own. It was horrible, and we had a car pound there, and you know, I really fear for people who had to go and collect their car there in night time. You know, it was not nice. The Bagley's warehouse, which is now, you know, a fantastic building, you know, that was used for raves. But I remember going there on site visits, and I don't know, just to see it transformed into this new brilliant addition to London, the way the canal is being used, the open spaces, the variety of uses, the restoration of the buildings. So it's really kept its character. You know, I love it. I love it. So I quite like going down there for a coffee. I completely get all the arguments about how it's priced people out of the area. Locals,
it's not a cheap cup of coffee, is it?
Exactly. And when you look, you know, Somers Town, which is a stone's throw away from, you know, it's one of the most deprived areas in the country. So I know that Camden, you know, take it very seriously about how they can use the benefits of, you know, the inward investment and the growth in one area to help, you know, the more vulnerable residents. But you know, that's tricky the country over. But I do really like King's Cross. So I know that Argent are doing Brent Cross Town up over in Barnet. So I have sort of high hopes that will be of a good standard as well, because that will help our borough too. So I really like that one. And then I'm less familiar. I live in West London, Northwest London, so I'm less familiar with the regeneration schemes out east. So all around the Docklands and, you know, the Olympic legacy. It's on my to-do list to go exploring those. But I do love Battersea Power Station. I think it's fantastic. So I've lived in London a long time. I remember when that was going to be a leisure park, you know, with whirly things, roller coasters and all of that. Yeah, and then it lost its roof, didn't it? And it, you know, you sort of thought, how on earth is this building going to survive? And you know, I think it's fantastic. I was fortunate enough to go and see it on a tour. Not into the residential bits, but into the before it opened. And yeah, I just inside the way they've kept a lot of the features of it being a power station, and it wasn't a power station for very long. But anyway, so I love that. I think
have you been up in the chimney?
No, I haven't, but I know you can do that. I might put that on my list.
So a friend of mine, architect Chris Dyson, was telling me yesterday they had their practices office party at the power station.
Wow.
Part of it was at the power station. They went up in the chimney lift, and in a sort of glass cylinder, takes you out to the top of the chimney, and you get the big view across London.
Wow.
I mean, it's a staggering thought to think of you put yourself into that position. So I can't wait to have a go.
Yeah, no, that would be good. But just sort of reflecting on the wider regeneration and some of going back to the challenges. So that investment in the Battersea Power Station meant the viability. When there wasn't much affordable housing, was there? And that's been a sort of complaint, sort of thrown back at Wandsworth. But sometimes you just have to make these choices. And I know affordable housing is really important, and all local authorities want to maximise it. But look at that power station, and reflecting on the value that the historic, heritage, culture, and buildings like that add to the flavour of London, I think is is good. That was good.
You can get in a lot of trouble with this sort of argument, but I one of the things that makes London great is differentiation between different places. You move from one place to another across the city, and they're really different from each other, and I think that's really important. And sometimes places are different in ways that aren't particularly good for the greatest number of people, but as a whole it makes the city, it adds to the city. So it's a I'm a bit torn on that argument, but it does seem to me that our city having Battersea Power Station in it is for the best, isn't it? It makes it a better place. But it's not about me, it's about you, Alice. I need to stop blathering on. Let's move on to the next question. Let's ask you about your influences. How have you formed these opinions on what makes good development and what isn't so good? Who and what has influenced the way you look at these things?
Yeah, well, I suppose I'll sort of I'll go back to when I was a teenager and learning, at school. And as that evolved, I realised I always liked human geography, and I realised I liked towns and cities. Well, I liked the human geography, and I went to university and I did a social science degree, and my specialisms were geography and psychology. And what I realised I liked human geography, cities and towns and how they functioned. And with psychology, I liked all the behavioural stuff. So I was less keen on the biology, I was less keen on the physical geography. And what I realised was I liked understanding how people behaved in space and how the environment could influence people's lives, behaviour, etc. It took me quite a long time to realise that, but that's what it was. Now, so I did joint honours. The only time the psychology and the geography overlapped was when we did about the distribution of people with mental illnesses in cities, and in those days they tended to live in inner cities. So was it living in, so it was a bit of cause and effect. So did they drift there, or did it trigger mental illnesses? So that was the only one lecture of those 3 years that the topics overlap. But that's what I was interested in. I didn't relate that to planning at the time, but then I realized that there was this thing called planning. So I did a postgrad in planning in London at the Bartlett in the early to mid 1980s, and I've been in London ever since, because I realised I absolutely loved London. So I suppose that was the start of my sort of interest in planning and my career. But in terms of who or what has influenced me, I think it's impossible, because it's osmosis. And I'm still learning, I'm still being influenced, and I'm still understanding what good development is. So it's almost nearly everybody I've ever worked with or come across. I mean, some perhaps better than others. So I've had some brilliant planning colleagues, managers. So there'll be debates in the office about what makes something tick. Or sometimes you've got to justify a recommendation about why it's a good scheme. So all of that, I think, just influences me. But
who are you most excited about getting into a room with over that period? When you thought, I'm going to have a discussion with so and so, who really sort of made the hair stand up and made you think that's going to be good?
Oh, I don't know that I can answer that. I mean, partly because before I came to Brent, I had 10 years at the LGA, so I left Islington in 2005. So you're taking my memory back a bit too far to remember sort of individual companies or names. But I suppose it's more in terms of what. So what excited me was a urban, new scheme. I very much think that new development should reflect the time it's in. So I don't like recreating a building from 100 years ago, if that's not when you're building it. But I do think you take historic themes. So you might take the history of a site and reflect that in some of the design of a new thing. So personally, I'm sure the King isn't listening, but when there was the fire at Windsor Castle, I didn't agree with the fact that they just rebuilt it as it was, because the bit that burned down wasn't even the original bit. So why I felt you should build something that reflected the time that we were in. So that is kind of, I don't know where that influence came from, but that's just sort of what I think over time.
Let me suggest something to you. Does that have anything to do with growing up in Reading?
Growing up in Reading. Yeah, we just spoke about this earlier. So possibly. So I did spend my 18 years before I went to university growing up in Reading, and whilst I had a perfectly happy childhood, it wasn't a town that excited me. It's changed massively now, though I don't really have reason to go back and visit much. But if anyone's watching there, the Lido at Reading, which is where I do meet old school friends, is fantastic. That's a really, really good piece of development. But generally, I felt Reading, it was too close to London to be a town in its own right, to develop its own identity. I think they've almost made that proximity to London now a benefit, and they've capitalised on that, and that has triggered some regeneration. And for industry and businesses, it's a real hotspot. So, but at the time, I didn't want to bring up my children, I should say, in a place like Reading. They've been brought up in Brent, as it happens.
But is that so that sort of drives you? You have a desire for change. You like to see change. You want places to modernise and change and evolve.
Yeah, most definitely. And in fact, it's an argument that I have used in the past for places that on the outside indicate that they don't want to see change, but at the same time things aren't evolving or improving. And it's to say, if you want things to stay the same, sometimes you need change, because if you want that pub to survive or your high street to survive, you need people to come in and spend money and do things differently. So yeah, no, very much. I mean, I think that goes back to sort of being a core of being a planner and local government. It's about wanting to see things improve and get better.
Great stuff. Right. So in terms of things improving and get better, what were the watershed moments in your career? What were the sort of maybe the sliding door sort of moments that where if that hadn't happened, you wouldn't be running Regen in Brent?
Okay.
Now?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So I one of the first ones is, so my first job was at Westminster, and when you're a graduate planner at Westminster, you get to deal with a lot of shop fronts and air conditioning units. And when I was first allowed out on site unaccompanied with my very first real case, it was to look at some air conditioning units. But these air conditioning units were on the roof behind the Coca-Cola sign at Piccadilly Circus. Now, so I was up there just thinking, I'm on the roof behind the Coca-Cola sign.
You're in a film set.
Yeah, I mean, how fantastic can this job possibly be? And that was it was like you had me at hello moment. I just was absolutely sold on, this is what I want to do. This is fantastic. Don't really care about air conditioning units so much, but just the very fact. So Westminster, the W1 postcode, which was my patch, what a phenomenal place to start your planning career. It was brilliant. So I think that moment of realization on the roof was where it sort of cemented that I'd made the right sort of choice to start my career and be a planner. So that I've stayed on that path. So from Westminster, I moved to Camden, and then in the 90s, and that's when I started my family. And I said to my boss, so he was a big influence on me actually at the time, I'd like to come back on a job share basis and work part-time. Now
who was this? What was his name?
It was a guy called Mike Jordan, who was head of development management at the time. He's retired a while ago now. And I said, can I come back as a job share? And he said, yeah, absolutely, no problem. So he was really supportive, and the culture of the council was really supportive of that. So we appointed a job share partner, Philippa, and Philippa and I worked together for 10 years as a job share, and that enabled us both to have spend time with our children, young families, but continue our careers, continue our pension contributions, because we, were able to continue working. We didn't feel the need to stop. And we both went on to have other sets of maternity leave, whilst we did this, we covered for each other. It worked really well. But two things. One is I recognised that we were in a financial position, both of us, that we could sacrifice 2/5 of our salary, because we both work 3 days a week, and that these days the costs of housing and childcare don't make that an option for many people. So I recognise I was very fortunate. But the more interesting thing is that we went on to apply for a promotion. We were a team leader at Camden. We applied as a package to be development manager at Islington, and we got the job because they realised they were getting 2 brains for the price of one. It was very rare that we were both on holiday at the same time, so there was always somebody there. And I think that my initial boss saying yes to the job share, Islington for then progressing us in our careers, just really helped us to stay both of us to stay in our careers. So that was that.
Do you think that aspect of it would be as welcome now as it was then?
Yeah, I think so.
So would you advise other planners to go down that path? You know, it's a sensible way to develop your career.
I would do, if you're in a position where you can support that sort of cuts your working hours. What I would say though is proper job share is different from 2 part-timers. And the way Philip and I worked it, we spoke to each other every day, we'd brief each other. We were very much a job share. We were just 2 people who were in the office for 3 days a week. And I think that's important to make a job share work. So that was a big watershed moment. Then working at the Planning Advisory Service exposed me to local authorities all over the country. And that was quite an eye-opener because I'd only ever been in London. So that broadened my perspective on things, and I think made me better placed to go back to frontline delivery when I went back to Brent. So getting the job as head of planning at Brent and then being able to be promoted to director, that's facilitated why I'm here today. So
what advice would you give someone starting out in planning now and trying to sort of forge a career?
I would say soak it up, take up as many opportunities as you possibly can. So ask to shadow a senior person. Get to know the rest of the council as well. Go back to my point earlier about knowing how planning can help deliver on corporate perspectives, particularly if you want to be a senior, a strategic member of the leadership team or management team at a council. So soak it all up, get as much experience as you can. You do have to take the rough with the smooth because people do shout at you, people get cross with you, people try and undermine you and your professional opinion, etc. But that's all part of, developing as a person and a worker and as a planner.
You're not painting a pretty picture there.
No, but it's also really exciting. I mean, that's a minor part of it. I mean, and the satisfaction that you get when something that's tricky, you come up with a solution to it and it ends up getting consent and then it gets built, and you can see it and you're pleased with it and you feel like there's your legacy. And one of mine, I know we're getting close to the end now, but one of mine, you mentioned earlier on about big regeneration and little regeneration. So I was involved, I helped, we've got where I live, which is in Brent, a little local cinema, and they wanted to build it's a social enterprise. They needed a second screen to be able to increase their offer. And it's a tight backland site, but I had some meetings with the architect and the owners, and I really wanted to make this work. And we came up with a solution that did work. It got planning permission. It's a very popular cinema, so nobody really objected. And it's been built, and I've been to the cinema in it. And sometimes it's little things like that I'm really proud of. It's a good design, and and it's worked out. So for younger planners, you can take these little gems, and they're fantastic, and you've influenced them. You can impact what happens on the ground. You can change things. So use your voice.
What about that decision not to go into the private sector? What was the decision-making process there?
Well, I don't know that I'd say I've actively made a decision. I mean, I started off wanting to work for a local government because I see planning in local government as if you're working in development management, you really get to shape schemes and stop bad things from happening. Actually, you really get to shape schemes, influence the way things turn out on the ground. And if you're working in planning and policy, well, both areas, you really get under the skin of the place. And if you are in planning policy, you can really set the vision for how that place helps set the vision, because there's obviously the politicians set the vision, but you implement that vision and you set the framework for that vision to make it happen. So and I've always just liked working in the public interest and with that sort of underlying thing, which is trying to make life better for people. So I don't know. It was never a conscious decision, really. I just always wanted to go to the next local authority. I like it. I like working for the politicians. I like effectively working for the residents who vote for politicians. You know, I think you can have a good influence on the ground. So it's just different from moving from project to project in, you know, different parts of the country, but I'm sure would be very interesting as well. But yeah, I like what I do.
However much you like it, you can't be doing it all the time. So what are you doing when you're not being director of operations at Brent?
Yeah. So, well, as the usual, you know, family and friends. I've got 3 boys who come and grow from living at home. They're sort of young adults now. There's all of that stuff. And I've lived in this area for over 25 years, so I've got lots of local friends and activities. But thinking about how what I do outside might influence my work. So I do a little bit of running. Not so much anymore, but I've run 2 marathons. One was the London Marathon. So I like exploring London.
What was the other one?
It was Nice to Cannes in France, actually.
Wow.
Ran out the red carpet in Cannes. So I like getting out and exploring London. But I cycle to work. I'm not a serious competitive cyclist. I like leisure cycling. During the first lockdown, me and a couple of girlfriends, we started going out on Sunday mornings, and because there was no traffic, you could just cycle all over London, and it was fantastic. So cycling down Regent Street with no cars, or buses, it was amazing. So we just took to cycling all over the place into the city, you know, and we've kept it up actually. No, they're not every week, but so we cycled to the Tower of London to look at the Wildflower Garden. We've cycled to Brick Lane for a bagel and gone around Shoreditch. We go down to the river and on the cycle superhighways. We go out along the canal. We've been out to Marble Hill. Want to go out to Stratford. So the ability to go out when it's fairly quiet still on a Sunday morning and experience London and the buildings and the spaces. And so cycling through Chelsea, and you'll see a very old building like a church down a Mews, and let's go and look at that, and you discover all these places that you didn't know. So I guess that's sort of partly mixing leisure and work interests.
Do you find that you do that discovery in a sort of childlike mind as well, because it takes you back to being a kid on a bike?
Yeah, almost. I think it probably is that. And I quite like sharing things, because I suppose over the years I've got to learn quite a lot about London and some things I've been involved with or I know about. So with my friends, one of my favourite things is taking them past a housing estate regeneration and saying, right, let's spot the social housing. No, you can't, can you? You know, and sort of like we've been down to King's Cross a few times, so I've been able to talk about, you know, about that and different things. So yeah, so I guess there's a joy in exploring and sharing, boring possibly, some of my friends with that knowledge. But yeah, that continual exploration and learning from the spaces around me. Yeah.
Can I loop that back into your work then? So how has that impacted? How's your love of cycling through London, your experience of lockdown, how's that influencing the development of cycling infrastructure and walking infrastructure in Brent and its significance in your planning decisions?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I think generally the cycling infrastructure in central London is really good. And I know there are debates about you know, from people who don't like it, but I think it's fantastic. I think in Brent, it's emerging. There's still quite a long way to go, particularly in the north of the borough, perhaps where it's more hilly. It's perhaps more needed because it's a bit more isolated from public transport. There's much heavier car reliance in the north of the borough, but we do certainly in the bigger regeneration areas think about those connectivities for walking and cycling, because you know, our council, like most councils, have declared a climate emergency and want to see a transition to active travel, which is difficult. I tend to think of it as short-term pain for long-term behaviour change that we need to go through. But yeah, embedding ability to access a safe road network is much easier when you are building that road network in a regeneration area, because you can design it in from the start rather than retrofitting it by putting a cycle lane up Wembley High Road, which is the route I have to take to work, which I do feel safe because it is a cycle lane, but it's not exactly pleasant and it's not going to encourage people to cycle. So yeah, so I think it's something that a lot of in outer London boroughs and TfL have got to sort of work quite hard on, because it's still in its infancy, I would say.
And are there parts of the city and other cities elsewhere that you particularly enjoy cycling because of what's been done in terms of the infrastructure?
Oh, I don't know that I didn't really take my bike on holiday,
Yeah.
to be honest, although we are looking at a cycling holiday in Europe for this year.
Oh, whereabouts?
Well, there was one which we did book before the pandemic, but was stopped because of the pandemic. And it was called 4 Countries. And you started in Switzerland and you cycled into Liechtenstein, Austria, and Germany, I think, on a loop, which sounded fantastic.
Whenever I look at a map of those 4 countries, I see a lot of pointy bits that you'd have to go up.
Yeah,
So
no,
is that part of the attraction?
No, not really. This was a flatter one. It was a lower level, so it was more around lakes. I love lakes. I love European lakes. So yeah, so we might be doing that this summer. So other cities, don't really know. Don't really cycle around other cities.
But in terms of the influence on how you're approaching planning, it's not direct. You're not particularly focused on making that infrastructure part of developments that are coming forward.
Well, from a planning perspective, yes, but perhaps not from a personal perspective. Yeah.
Fair enough. Alice, thank you very much indeed. It's a perfect place to end, and it's the perfect time to end. So please accept my warmest thanks for taking part in our live interview. Viewers, our Voice of Authority Operational Director for Regeneration, Growth and Employment at the London Borough of Brent, Alice Lester, MBE. And as the virtual applause is sort of ringing out across the internet, I'll take the time to thank you, viewers, for tuning in and learning about the woman helping to shape the vision for Brent, and to let you know that we're going to be back in the new year with a whole new programme of webinars and in-person events and some new formats and platforms for local authorities. So look forward to letting you know about those in 2023. Until then, I'm going to take this opportunity to thank the wonderful team at 3Fox for all of their support, and all our viewers for sticking with us during 2022. So from our Voice of Authority, Alice Lester, MBE, from Carter Jonas and GLE and Haptic Architects and London Square Partners, and from me, good afternoon and happy Christmas.